But Brian rang me one day and said, or asked me if Charles Sweeting was any relation. And said, the Charles Sweeting, the Kingsford-Smith, landed on his farm. And I said, yes, he's my grandfather. So this is how it all eventuated. Charles Sweeting's father was brought out to Australia by Bishop Hale to be the first headmaster of his school, which is now Hale School, but back in those days was high school. So that Sweeting, George Sweeting his name was also a Anglican priest, as well as an educator. So how my grandfather actually get to own a farm, I'm not really sure, but he did it. And prior to that, he went to Roseworthy College to learn how to be a farmer. And he wasn't the original owner of the farm. He bought about 3 or 4 farms actually, and ended up with about 4,000 acres back in, from what I can gather, around about 1920. And he farmed there from 1920 to 1960. Anyway, Smith and his crew made the first non-stop flight across Australia on the night of August the 8th, 1928. It was a record-breaking flight from Melbourne, Point Cook actually, quite a few people know where that is, to Perth and to Maylands, a distance of 1,990 miles. It was the first non-stop crossing of Australia, and on the map here you can see that they left Point Cook, went to Adelaide, Ceduna, and didn't quite make it to Maylands. They ended up going to Bunbury and flew up to Maylands. It was pretty bad weather and they drifted south, as they say, of the desired track and hit the West Australian coast of Bunbury. The crew consisted of Squadron Leader Charles Kingsford-Smith, Flight Lieutenant Charles Ong, T.McWilliam, who was the wireless operator, and H.Litchfield. Squadron Leader Kingsford-Smith said that Litchfield was the best navigator in Australia. Now, unfortunately, he didn't take into account the 2-hour difference between Perth and Melbourne and arrived 2 hours early. So I hope to see the worst navigator. There were surprisingly few people to meet then at Maylands, obviously. They intended to make another record-breaking attempt on the return flight. They were going to fly back along the same type of route, taking off from Maylands and going back to Point Cook. Unfortunately, Maylands was badly affected by heavy rain and their departure was delayed for nearly a fortnight. The heavy load of fuel could not be uplifted at Maylands, so they had to make some other plans. Well, Smithy chose a large paddock on the Sweeting farm, which was actually a designated landing area prior to this, of course. I did have a map of it at one stage, and like many things, we lost it in our moves around the place. So unfortunately I can't show it to you. It's about a mile and a half or 2 kilometres south of Tammin in some reasonably sandy country. The reason that was chosen because the rest of the land around Tammin was very heavy land, and of course in winter you get bogged if you try to land an aeroplane in that. So anyway, he chose this large paddock on the Sweeting farm as his departure point. They had to have a lot of fuel, obviously, so about 650 gallons were transported to the Sweeting farm. The takeoff at Maylands was made at a reduced weight, and just had the 2 pilots, Litchfield and McWilliam, plus their baggage, were transported to Tammin by road and rail. The railway line, as anyone knows, passes through Tammin and on the way up to Kalgoorlie, so that's the main route. And the main road, Grayson Highway, goes through there as well. So, Smith and Oldham eventually departed Maylands on Saturday afternoon of the 25th of August 1928. The flight to Tammin took just over an hour, and I looked around and did some research, and the Fokker trimotor, they said, had a top speed of 118 miles an hour. Now I don't know whether that's in a dive or a cruise, but the distance to Tammin in miles is 120 miles. I know it pretty well because I lived there for a lot of the early part of my life. And the flight was an hour, so they either had a tailwind, nil wind, or whatever. But anyway, it was a pretty quick flight. And on his arrival, Smithy was greeted at the Sweeting family farm, Sweeting airfield really, or the airfield. In this photo, Brian pointed out to me there's two people shaking hands here, which I hadn't noticed. So on the left is Charles Sweeting shaking the hand of Olm, and Kingsford-Smith's on the right there shaking someone's hand, which I think is a chap named Fliers, but I wouldn't bet on it. Now Kingsford-Smith, I believe, was about 5'8", so my grandfather's quite a lot shorter. He was actually a well-known jockey and a very successful jockey in his earlier days, so my memory of him was a very small man that didn't weigh too much. And the fellow on the extreme right is a fellow named Reg Russell. I knew him. He was a butcher in Tammin, and he also had a carrier business, carrying livestock mainly. And Reg Russell's wife, Marjorie, took most of these photos. I don't know what age Reg is there, but I guess so somewhere in his 30s anyway, I think. There's another shot here of a chap named Packham. Now I thought it was Tom Packham, but Ron Aikenhead, who knows everything about Tammin, told me it's Tom Packham's father. So here he is with Smithy and Olm having a quick snack before they depart. Now also the Southern Cross here is being refuelled by, and as you can see, it's Motor Spirit. And I found another photo somewhere which I've subsequently mislaid, and it was Plume Motor Spirit. It's no longer in existence, of course. And I also found out that the octane rating was somewhere between 50 and 70. So you can imagine the problems. Just as an aside, in the 70s we used to fly Osters on no gas, and that was about 80 octane, and we had our problems there too, I can tell you. So anyway, the crowds at the Sweeting farm are all here. Smithy's in his element with a couple of women. He was pretty well known for his womanising. I think I can tell you all that, you probably know anyway. There were 4,000 people. Now where they got 4,000 people, I do not know, because there's only at max 650 people, I think at max, lived in town. So they must have got people from Northam to Merredin and surrounding districts to get 4,000 people in. So I guess it was an estimation, but it's a lot of people, 4,000 gathering at the paddock, Sweeting farm. The Southern Cross departed at 4:45 on Saturday the 25th with 6 tonnes of fuel aboard. Now I also found out, because it was soft, or it was a sandy paddock, we used to call it sandplane in those days, but it couldn't get moving because of the weight of the fuel, etc., etc. So a lot of people, men I guess, had to give it a push to get it moving, and finally it got moving and got airborne. They arrived at Adelaide 7:50 a.m. on Sunday, August 26th, after a perfect night flight. I hope the navigator got his time right that time. At some time after the journey to Adelaide, Charles Owen presented Smithy with an annotated photo in memory of their time in Tammin. Now you can see Kingsford-Smith and someone on the horse. Oh no, that's not the horse, the sheep. Well, I suppose it's a sheep, but it looks more like a goat to me. And I guess it may be a goat, but I never saw a goat in Tammin while I was there. But anyway, there were plenty of people we thought were goats. not actually the animal. So I don't recognise anybody much around there. Obviously, 1928, they were fairly young, and when I first met them when I got born, they were a lot more than that. Okay, so that's about the end of my stint, and hopefully it wasn't too boring. Thank you.